क्या होता है धार्मिक वे ऑफ लाइफ?
Like, how do you define dharma? Dharma has multiple meanings.
इफ कौटिल्य वर अलाइव, वो इंडियन गवर्नमेंट को क्या एडवाइस देते
So
हैं?
even if Kautilya was there today, I think he'll have a challenge in navigating bureaucracy.
पॉलिटिक्स को साइड में रखते हैं, आपको लगता है एग्रीकल्चर पे टैक्स होना चाहिए इंडिया में?
It's a long process. I don't know where we'll get there, and I don't think it's one of the higher priorities now.
टैक्स पे कुछ नहीं करेंगे आप चेंज? सबसे पहले तो आप लोग सबटाइटल्स ऑन करिएगा क्योंकि आज के हमारे गेस्ट सिर्फ और सिर्फ इंग्लिश में बोलने वाले हैं. नमस्ते एंड वेलकम. टीआरपी पे आज हमारे साथ हैं इकोनॉमिस्ट एंड ऑथर श्रीराम बालासुब्रमणियन. 2 किताबें इनकी बहुत फेमस हैं, हाईली रिकमेंडेड. पढ़िएगा, लिंक डिस्क्रिप्शन में दिया है, ऑर्डर कर सकते हैं. पहली है कौटिल्यानॉमिक्स और दूसरी धर्मानॉमिक्स. भारत की आर्थिक सोच को बिल्कुल नया विजन दे रही हैं ये दोनों किताबें. इस एपिसोड में क्या हुआ है, मौर्यन एम्पायर से लेकर मोदी एरा तक, कौटिल्य के अर्थशास्त्र और उनके प्रिंसिपल्स को आज के इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसीज में कैसे इंप्लीमेंट किया जा सकता है, और हमारे मॉडर्न प्रॉब्लम्स का, स्पेशली जो इकोनॉमिक चैलेंजेस हैं, उनका क्या एंशिएंट सॉल्यूशन पॉसिबल है. तो इन सारी चीज़ों के बारे में बात होगी, लेकिन उससे पहले प्लीज़ वेलकम श्रीराम बालासुब्रमणियन. नमस्ते, स्वागत है.
Thank you. Namaste, Raunac. Great to be here. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
सो ये इंग्लिश में होने वाला है पॉडकास्ट गाइस, एंड मैं क्वेश्चंस हिंदी इंग्लिश मिक्स पूछूंगा, एंड ऑफ कोर्स श्रीराम उसको इंग्लिश में ही आंसर करेंगे. सबटाइटल्स ऑन कर लीजिएगा. इनफैक्ट हम इसका डब वर्जन भी ऑन ज़रूर करेंगे. सो वेलकम टू टीआरपी.
Thank you, and thanks for having me here, Raunac. We have a lot of common
Heard a lot
friends.
about your books
Thank you.
and your thought process, so need to explore a lot in this podcast. श्रीराम, फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन मेरा यही होगा कि कल्चर का इकोनॉमी पे क्या इम्पैक्ट होता है?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question for us to start with. Because, often a lot of the discussions, especially on the economy, is very in the now, in the current. But if you really think about it, the bigger picture of how countries aspire to be economic superpowers, how countries have evolved to become economic superpowers over a longer period of time, say 20, 30, 40, 50 years. That sort of perspective, I think, is very useful. If you really look at the prism of cultural norms and narratives, basically the role of culture and its impact on economic outcomes, it's not a sort of a Bharat phenomena alone. In the rest of the world, many countries who aspired to be economic superpowers have invested both time and energy, and also evolved their economic principles based on such paradigms. So, for instance, if you take Japan, the entire sort of Japanese economic model is based on a lot of intrinsic Japanese ideas.
Okay.
That's why you see that when you walk in, when you get into Japan, everything is in Japanese, right? It's very difficult to see English. Of course, there are people who speak English, but the natural tone and tenor of the entire Japanese economy is highly customized to their sort of cultural, societal fabric. So that's why you even see within the Ministry of Finance in Japan a whole unit which talks about the role of cultural norms and narratives and economic history. Similarly, in China, if you take the Chinese sort of prosperity in the last 20, 30, 40 years, a lot of their economic principles are highly decentralized at the local level. I mean, though they're a communist country, I think enough research has been done to show that more of their economic ideas at the decentralized level, at the village level, at the grassroots level, is highly linked to those contours of cultural norms and narratives in those
and
local,
language is a part of that.
Exactly, local communities. I mean, this is why I'm trying to mention China is China is by and large a non-religious society, but within that paradigm itself, there are a lot of these cultural contours which are there, which are very natural to their way of life, and policy making sort of tries to account for this. And of course, having the bigger picture of ideas from the rest of the world, but at the foundational level, having it customized to their local norms and narratives. Even the United States, the paragon of, say, Western capitalism, much of the ideas emanated from this idea of Protestant ethic. The Protestant ethic was central to both the idea of a nation state, which the French Revolution and things like that, and also on the economic side of how modern day capitalism evolved. A lot of credit is given to the Protestant ethic, either by Max Weber and a few others. So even in the United States, which is not as culturally dense as, say, Asian societies, I think at the foundational level, there is a sort of an inspiration, indigenous inspiration, which drives their thrust for economic dominance and economic prosperity. I think in that context, in this big picture that we're talking about, Bharat's case is a no-brainer. We are the most culturally dense, culturally diverse society in humanity across the breadth of this land. And every, say, few kilometers, you have new languages, sub-languages. There is so much diversity in our land, which means that there is a natural way of life. I call this in my books the Dharmic Way of Life, which drives not just spiritual, religious choices, but more importantly, economic, social choices, which individuals make, corporates make, and also policymakers make. So this is a sort of an extension of a multi-thousand-year-old phenomena, this way of life, which plays a very important role in a lot of these choices in our society. So that's where my research sort of brings together these ideas. Through my previous book in Dharmanomics, I talk about 3rd century BCE is Arthashastra, and I apply it, and I create this concept called Dharmic capitalism, based on the idea. Basically, I define dharma through the prism of ethics, responsibilities, and institutions, and engaging with the rest of the world. And then I map it to the Indian economy, trade, labor contracts, inequality, and things like that in the first book. And this book, Dharmanomics, which you just spoke about, deals with the common era kingdoms, the Cholas, Pallavas, Pandyas, Kambojadesa and Cambodia, Southeast Asian kingdoms, Vijayanagaram kingdoms, where not only does Kautilya and Dharmic capitalism play a role, even the idea of the Dharmic ecosystem, the temple-based economies, seeing the temple much beyond just as a religious institution, but as an economic sort of driver, and then the role of corporate guilds and things like that. Lastly, for those who are curious and interested, the Honorable Prime Minister's visit to Gangaikonda Cholapuram is an important landmark visit, and I cover that in this book as well, on how the Cholas not only had a flourishing, not only was economics, the global economics central in the Asian region, in the Indian Ocean during that time, but they had such a sustainable way of evolving the economy as well.
So what is the significance of that temple which Prime Minister visited?
Yeah, so it's called Gangaikonda Cholapuram. In Tamil it means Gangaikonda. That is someone who's gone to the Ganga and taken the Ganga and visited and come back to this place, Cholapuram.
Okay.
So the thesis is that his father, Rajaraja Chola, built the Brihadishwara temple, which is in Tanjavur. It's called the Tanjai Periya Goyal. It is one of the most significant landmarks in southern Bharat, it's been there for almost 1,000 plus years, and it's withstood so many earthquakes, so many natural calamities, and still stands tall. So it's as an architectural marvel, it's second to none. So his son, Rajendra Chola, he built a sort of a replica of this temple in a town which is near Tanjavur. And he ensured that the replica was not as grand as his father's, because he wanted to sort of build it a tone below.
But he had an option to build it.
Of course. In fact, he was considered to be even more successful because Rajendra Chola crossed the oceans to Southeast Asia.
Correct.
That's why he's also called Kadaram Konda Cholan. Kedah is a place in Malaysia, which is still there, where Rajendra Chola actually went all the way there. His troops went all the way there and conquered the place. So that's why it's called like Gangaikonda Cholapuram, Kadaram Konda Cholan. So Cholan who went to Kedah itself. So such was the expansive sort of, reach of Rajendra Chola. So he was he was considered historically a even more powerful king. But he wanted to sort of build it with the same nuances, but slightly less grand, so that the father's, bigger temple, stands out. But it's an amazing place. So that is the reason why the Honorable PM took the Ganga Jal and came and did, Archana in that temple in Gangaikonda Cholapuram. Because what Rajendra Chola did was every king henceforth would take the Ganga and then sort of initiate themselves before, Ganga Jal initiate themselves before starting their reign. That is one of the theories which they mentioned. So it's a very special place, and I think it's part of the Cholas' expansive or their prosperous reign that they had.
आपने अपनी बुक्स में भी, कॉन्वर्सेशंस में भी धार्मिक वे ऑफ लाइफ को बहुत बार मेंशन किया है. कैन यू डिफाइन क्या होता है धार्मिक वे ऑफ लाइफ?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to define. Similarly, like how like how do you define dharma, right? Dharma has multiple meanings. But for the sort of narrow confines of, say, public policy, I define it through the prism of ethics, ethics, which is an important component of dharma. Another is responsibilities. Much of modern discussion is on rights.
Right.
But I think in the Dharmic approach, the focus is more on responsibilities, which means familial responsibilities, societal responsibilities, environmental responsibilities. And also, the third would be, the role of engaging with the rest of the world. I think that's, again, an important point. We often are told that somehow Bharat was, exposed to the rest of the world only post-1990, the economic reforms of 1990. So that's, very much away from the truth. Except for the period between post-independence, 1947, till about 1990, much of, if you look at our history, we have constantly engaged with the rest of the world. So engaging with the rest of the world, Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, as a concept, is also part of this, Dharmic definition. And this way of life, within these sort of definitions of Dharma, it maps on to the role of institutions, for example. How do you create more Dharmic institutions? How ethical institutions help? Ethical leadership. How do you engage responsibilities in terms of society, in terms of people, and familial responsibilities and things like that. And also the prism of sustainability. How do you create sustainable growth and welfare based on these ideas? So this is what I would, broadly characterize.
Okay.
And in practical sort of terms, the Mahakumbh is an example of a Dharmic way of life, right? It's an important component. One is the temples by themselves, right? There are thousands of temples that we have in all our villages. People go to the temples for religious purposes, spiritual purposes. That drives a lot of their choices. Because when you go to a temple, you would invest in tourism, you would invest in going to other areas in that particular place, you would want to reside there for some time. You would have the demand for all the shops around the temple in that village. So you kind of create an economic ecosystem around the temple because of this way of life. Similarly, for the Mahakumbh, for instance, right? The Mahakumbh is another example. It's not a specific temple per se, but it is a sort of a Dharmic event which happens once in X number of years. And in this case, 144 plus years, where it became a grand event where you go and take a snan. So that is again an example of what I define as a Dharmic way of life. Again, when corporates make economic choices, so somewhere Mukesh Ambani was talking to Jensen Huang, the founder of NVIDIA, in a conference in Mumbai, where he was mentioning that he starts a lot of his projects during the time of Diwali, because that's a good time according for them to begin projects, and both with the Bombay stock market as well as from his personal standpoint.
Correct.
Right? This is not something you would hear from, say, a Western business leader, right? Because the nature of most businesses in India, first of all, most of the top businesses in India still remain family-driven businesses. Okay, they might be publicly listed, but they're all structured around families and extended families, and they're the ones who are the major stakeholders in all these, whether you like it or not. That's the reality, right? Which means the choices that they make, much like Mr. Ambani, is not just driven by what we call completely rational thought, which means it's just not profit and loss. Profit and loss is a component of their decision making. Besides that, there are a lot of other factors, cultural factors, societal factors, their upbringing, how their families have sort of, evolved and how they make decisions. These factors play a very important role in the business choices that these people make, that corporates make. And I think this is, again, what I call this Dharmic way of life, right? Which is another element of it. So you had the temples, the temple-based structures, one. Two is, you have these event-based sort of cultural events across the year in various localities, various scales. And three, you have the impact at the individual level, at the corporate level, which I mentioned. At the individual level, again, if you look at the UPI transactions the last year, couple of years, the single highest number of UPI transactions in a particular year is during the month of Diwali and during the week of Diwali. So most of the non-essential expenditures, in economic jargon we call it discretionary expenditures, is driven a lot by our cultural norms and narratives. Whereas in the West, it's done only in some pockets, probably in December during Thanksgiving and Christmas. Whereas in Bharat, it's a year-long affair, except for probably the July Chaturmasya period, where it's generally a bit silent in terms of festivals. But it's a year-long exercise where people, not only partake in cultural activities, but use significant amount of time and energy and resources for being part of this, right? So at the individual level, also it makes a very important impact for people to make choices. Lastly, whether it's buying a laptop today or thousands of years back when Kautilya or Kautilya's Arthashastra was there, eventually individuals have to make business decisions to buy, purchase. So in this context, I think from an Indian Bharatiya sense, the matrix is much more diverse and multidimensional than purely on profit and loss. And I think all of this sort of, are some examples of what this Dharmic life is, and in terms of an economic public policy standpoint.
You spoke a lot about temples as an economic center. Can you elaborate and give some examples of some temples in India?
Yeah, so for instance, we spoke about the Cholas, right? I mean, let's take even Gangaikonda Cholapuram, for example, right? And the Tanjavur Brihadishwara temple. So in most of the villages, especially in Tamil Nadu, you have one major temple which is there in the village, which is like the central hub of that village, and then a plethora of smaller temples, surrounding the village, right? And most of, while agriculture is an important sort of driver, most of the commerce or the economics around the village is actually linked to the temple in some form or the other. So that's why ancient temples, whether it's the Brihadishwara temple, Padmanabha Swami temple in Kerala, Somnath in Gujarat, Jagannath Puri temple in Odisha, all of them are within an hour's drive from the coast at the max. There's a reason for this, because most of the temples serve not just as religious institutions, they are also financial institutions. They used to finance trade, they used to finance commerce. The Shrinis, the guilds, were getting financing from the temples to run their trading blocks. So much so that, when the Cholas conquered Southeast Asia, they were driven a lot by this guild called Ain Nuruvar. It's called 500 in Tamil. It's a translation. That guild played a very important role in financing the Cholas. So much so that one of the reasons why the Cholas went all the way there and conquered Southeast Asia but did not rule was because one of these guilds had issues of access in the Straits of Malacca between Singapore and Indonesia today. And one of the kingdoms, Srivijaya kingdom in Indonesia, was blocking it. So the Cholas wanted to relieve this guild off so that they can have access to trade. And that's why they went all the way there. So why I'm saying this is the guilds were so powerful that they were financing the mighty Cholas, and they triggered them to go and do such conquering as well. To resolve. So the guilds played a very important role, and they were backed by a lot of these temples. And of course, the temples provided employment. They also provided redistribution, right? So we had this discussion earlier where I was telling you that in the Vijayanagar temples, in the Tirumala plates, there they talk about how the wealthy people in a particular area invest money in an endowment. That endowment basically runs the temple. The temple, okay. The agamas and all the rituals of the temple are taken care of first. And then they provide food prasad for anyone who comes to the temple 3 times a day, right? This is a standard, this thing which happens today in most of the temples in Bharat today as well, in various forms. But if you really take a step back, look at the logical flow of this. What are we basically doing, right? Rich people in a particular area, they have some wealth. That wealth is put into an endowment, and that is transferred via the temple as an instrument into people giving them free food thrice a day. Which means anyone below poverty level can just walk into this temple and get at least their food choices served, right? Which means their basic sustenance is taken care of. So this is how some of the ancient temples used to function in terms of, so this is a way of redistribution, transferring the wealth from the rich to the poor through an instrument of the temple as a whole. So these are some ideas that you see, and why the temple has a much more multi-dimensional purpose rather than a unidimensional purpose.
सो बिकॉज आज के मॉडर्न टाइम में बहुत सारे ऐसे प्रॉब्लम्स हैं जिनका सोल्यूशन हम लोग एंशंट स्क्रिप्चर्स या टेक्स्ट में ढूंढने की कोशिश करते हैं. सो द क्वेश्चन इज लाइक डू वी हैव एंशंट सोल्यूशन टू द मॉडर्न प्रॉब्लम्स लाइक करंट द स्पेसिफिक इज इकोनॉमिक प्रॉब्लम्स and it's not only a national economic problem but a global issue. So do we have solution in our texts?
I think we do. I think, see, first we need to approach, we need to define our approach. I think the best way to look about it is what I call the first principles approach, right? If you are looking for a prescriptive text which gives you all that you need for today from the past, then it is impossible, rather difficult to get,
Correct.
right? Because the past has a particular context.
Absolutely.
It has a particular flavor. It is written in a particular prose, poetry, and it is also written in a different context and an era, right? But there are principles that you have from the past which we can apply even today. So I'll give you an example. Let's say Kautilya's Arthashastra, right? Kautilya talks about, wealth creation significantly, right? He really promotes wealth creation among corporates, among the private sector in those times, among the people. And the idea of earning wealth was not a taboo during Kautilya's time, right? Even in 3rd century BCE. We come from that sort of thing. So that's why you're engaging with trade. Why would you want to trade with the rest of the world
Absolutely.
if you do not want to, build entrepreneurs? So Kautilya himself sort of promoted this, right? Promoted the idea of wealth creation, creating wealth things. On the other hand, he also understood that both for his own political survival as well as, to balance things in the economy, you also wanted to take care of the people at the lower end of the economic, which means empower them, right? So he provided a variety of ways to empower them, right? So for instance, in terms of labor contracts, this is again one point which I mentioned. Like if you go to a construction site in, say, Delhi, and go to a daily wage laborer and ask him even today, does he have a contract? Something that says, what is your contract of employment? The chances that he or she will have is not even 10%.
Correct.
Right? Kautilya argues that, laborers in those times, that they had to, at least the employer had to put a broad sort of a contract outside that venue so that, laborers were given a broad understanding of what their role was, like how many hours you want to work, what is a rupee per hour, for instance, and things like that. A broad set of conditions, so that the employer does not take too much, does not override the employee.
Absolutely.
And the laborer is empowered to question the employer if it's beyond this paradigm. So these are some ways where he tried to empower people, give them labor, provide them labor contracts, talk about giving them redistribution benefits for people below poverty level, giving them something similar to a sort of a direct benefit transfers, but for people at a targeted level, below a poverty level. Third thing is something called a flexible minimum wage.
Okay.
See, a lot of your listeners would have heard about this concept called minimum wage everywhere.
Right.
Right? In the US, it's about $15 an hour. In India, there is urban and rural minimum wages, which people keep talking about. But this minimum wage in the context of inflation is very different. So, for instance, if it's $15 an hour, at 2% inflation is very different to at 7% inflation, which means at 2%, your cost is 2%. So the net is about $13. Whereas at 7%, the net is about $8. So what Kautilya says is this minimum wage has to be flexible, which means every year or so, you have to reassess, given the other economic conditions, what this minimum wage has to be, so that the laborer or the person doesn't get overrun just because other factors are not helping him in a proper way. So this is another example. So what I'm saying is, so if you really think about the ideas that I mentioned, both in terms of wealth creation as this, the principles are key,
correct.
Right? These principles can be applied even today, which means if there's an issue of inequality, how do you deal with inequality, right? If there's an issue with promoting entrepreneurs, promoting wealth creation, what are some of the principles that you'd use? When you're designing public policy, how do you design public policy in a way where these entrepreneurs are provided, a fairly easy sort of pathway for them to set up a business, for instance, right? How do you reduce regulations to enable this, right? So I think in that context, you find that a lot of the ancient texts provide you not only perspectives, but also principles which each of them have used.
Correct.
Okay, and it's a very healthy debate in the Arthashastra. Kautilya, in the beginning part of the introduction, he argues with Brihaspati. He says that I agree with certain things with Brihaspati on this. I agree with certain things with Shukracharya on this. I might not agree with them on this, right? And he also mentions that a lot of his ideas came from the past, from the Mahabharata, Ramayana, and the Rig Vedas and things like that. So there's a healthy sort of discourse, even among a lot of these ancient texts,
Right.
Where there's a constant engagement of ideas. And I think that is important because these were people in a similar era or over a sequence of eras. How did they sort of evolve their ideas? I think these principles, a principles-based approach on specific, policies, specific interventions can be far more productive rather than a wholesale approach.
करेक्ट सो because आपने principles and perspective की बात की है, हमारे education system में are we using those principles and perspectives?
In terms of, you're saying the syllabus
The
of some of these
syllabus,
ideas?
academics.
Yeah, I think, with the recent revisions in some of the NCR, textbooks and things like that, I think that's a positive step. Because we eventually need to move to a frame where, we need to get over this notion that somehow everything was fed to us by the white man and everything else that we did was either inferior to it or, somehow there's nothing existed, which is far from the truth. A lot of these, some of for instance, my books try to elucidate some of these points.
Right.
Purely because, the reason why I spent so much time in terms of putting together a framework, getting together a lot of these ideas, is because you wanted serious people to engage on this conversation.
Correct.
And one of my, goals initially was to do the third book, which I'm doing now, which is sort of, how some of these ideas can be applied for Viksit Bharat. But then I realized there is a lot of content, but there's not enough published material, very little published material, for me to, gain credibility or a neutral audience. Now that you've read all my books, people who have read them, they sort of know where the evidence is, what the research is. There's much more confidence in what I'm talking about in my third book. But the point, what I'm trying to make is that, there's such a dearth of content, serious content, research-based content, which needs to come together much more.
Right.
And more and more, I think things like IKS is facilitating that. And more has to come through the education system to give a very balanced perspective. I think, look, any sensible person who wants their kids to study history and economics and all these things in school, at best want them to have parity of thought, right? No one is saying that, we want a complete biased perspective of things. But the fact that the past has been so one-sided, I think it's important that such material, is brought through the education system because it does two things, right? One, it creates a sense of confidence among young people. As we move towards Viksit Bharat, the real generation that's going to experience Viksit Bharat is the ones in the 15 and 25s today, right? When they read material like this in a fairly analytical and fairly objective manner, I think it creates a sense of confidence about themselves, their past, their identities, and it's a very positive outlook for them as they pursue whatever that they want to do in their lives. So that's I think, a very important part.
Right.
And the second is also to, tell them that, look, just because a particular country in the West or anywhere else has a successful sort of, pathway, it's not necessarily the pathway that you want. Well, it's important that we take best practices and ideas from the rest of the world, which is very important. But I think we should also sort of look at ourselves of what suits us, what suits this land, and what suits the way of life of this land.
Right.
And then use them as catalysts and use them if need be, so that we become a very informed and engaging country.
श्रीराम, कौटिल्य ने टैक्सेशन प्रिंसिपल को भी अर्थशास्त्र में बहुत अच्छे से एक्सप्लेन किया है. सो कैन यू सिंप्लीफाई हियर फॉर आवर ऑडियंस कि टैक्सेशन प्रिंसिपल क्या था कौटिल्य का?
Yeah, so for instance, when you look at taxation, right, Kautilya had a broad range of about 16 to 25% of taxation. It's a broad range, 1/6, and this range was there for various sub-layers of people, income levels, and things like that.
Okay.
And of course, agriculture was also part of the tax bucket, which is.
So कौटिल्य के टाइम में
That's right. Yeah.
एग्रीकल्चर पे टैक्स लगता था.
That's right. Yeah.
तो फ्री कब से हुआ?
So yeah, that's again a controversial topic because today if you want to tax agriculture, I think there'll be riots in this country. But yeah, it was part of the taxation mix.
And what was the figure?
Again, it was between this range.
16 to 25%.
Correct. I mean, broadly speaking, this is the range that Kautilya sort of argued. And I think even today, if you broadly speak, I mean, there are a lot of exemptions and things like that. A reasonable taxation rate, direct tax rate, could be around this range. So in terms of taxation, I think in terms of a rate, this is a broad range. But again, coming back to principles, right? Mm-hmm. Kautilya says that much like a honey bee, right? You beyond a point, he feels that the people will start getting angry if you start to tax them more. So there is a delicate balance that one needs to make. So he's very cognizant of that. And more importantly for businesses, he talks about how do you sort of ease in regulations? How do you make it easier for businesses to function? What we call this ease of business today. Right? How do you, create mechanisms which is, ensuring that businesses have a very sort of ease in compliance and things like that. So he focuses on a lot of those ideas. So which means that he's saying that, look, though I'm taxing you within this range, I am ensuring that your regulations, your other parts of doing business is made efficient for you.
Correct.
And I'm providing you a lot of incentives. So for instance, for imports coming from outside, he provided certain incentives for traders who are trading inside Bharat to promote engagement with the rest of the world. On the other hand, he also wanted to make sure that the local people got a lot of opportunity.
Okay.
Because of this trade and engagement.
Right.
So it's sort of I would say a balance between both sides. So in terms of taxation, I think the principles of taxation, which is reasonable rates, very easy compliance, and ease of business for corporates, and also a social contract between the corporate and individuals. So this is where this idea of avoiding Matsya Nyaya is an important principle which Kautilya follows. So Matsya Nyaya is something where the big fish eats the small fish.
Correct.
In very, very simple terms, right? So which means a big corporate overpowering a small, say, kirana vendor, right? Or a big guy in society overcoming a small person. So what Kautilya said is one of the ways to deal with Matsya Nyaya is to ensure rule of law and order is implemented properly. So that will lead to ensuring that there is justice even for a common vendor as well as for a big person in society.
Right.
So one way of neutralizing this is also in the social contract saying, look, to businesses that even though I tax you at a particular rate, I will ensure that justice is given, due process is given through the law and order, right? That social contract again was a way where he was ensuring that not just the businesses were on board, even common people, small businesses were also on board because they know the system works.
Right.
So when you know the system works, you are open to paying money as a tax because you know these are the things that I'm getting as part of the system. So I think that again is sort of another point which can be applicable even today.
Absolutely. So जो I think श्रीराम ने कहा कि हनी बी का जो एक एग्जाम्पल था वो ये था कि कौटिल्य को पूछा गया कि कितना टैक्स लेना चाहिए, तो उन्होंने बोला गवर्नमेंट को उतना ही टैक्स लेना चाहिए जितना एक जो मधुमक्खी होती है वो फूल से शहद लेती, तो वो ले भी लेती है और फूल मरता भी नहीं है, तो आप टैक्स ले भी लो और जिससे आप टैक्स ले रहे हो वो मरे भी ना. सो खैर ये वो थॉट प्रोसेस था. वेल, व्हाट आर द रियल इकोनॉमिक चैलेंजेस इन फ्रंट ऑफ इंडिया? आपको क्या लगता है क्या है जिसको हमको मतलब फायर फाइटिंग मोड में फटाफट टैकल करना चाहिए?
Yeah, I like to view it for the positive side first, right? What are some of the advantages that we have? Okay. First thing is we have a fairly robust economy, one of the top growing economies in the world, consistently for many years. Very few countries in the world even have this.
Okay.
We are now that China is a bit on a downward sort of trajectory in terms of growth rates, we have been consistently the top growing economy in the world. In terms of growth rates for the last few years. So I think that's a very important plus. Second is, in terms of demographics, we have a very good young population. The peak of this young population is for the next probably decade or decade and a half. but our demographics are in the right place. We don't have an aging population yet. We have huge human capital, which means people, resources. There's not a single resource deficit in Bharat, across Bharat. We have so many resources, so many possibilities. So that's a huge strength, I would say. And the third thing is, in the broader sort of geo-economic global sphere, we are still seen as a rising power, a positive rising power.
Okay.
The US sees us as an ally, at least the US broader establishment, as a counter to China. So we have a space of, I would say, a good space for progress till we become the next China. And that's when more and more, we would face headwinds, till once we reach those income levels, per capita income levels and things like that.
Right.
So these are broad, things that you see.
Positives.
And then of course, the last point is you have strong leadership, very sort of respected global leadership, given an honor Prime Minister, and if you go anywhere in the world, the respect that both Bharat as well as the leadership has is significant. And I think that stability, irrespective of who's in power, I think provides a lot of, an important anchor for economic prosperity. So I would say these are, big advantages that we have, besides digitization or a lot of other things. In terms of the challenges, of course, I think jobs is a big challenge. Employment is
because many argue that India's growth is a jobless growth.
Right. And I think there's a lot of counter argument to that as well. If you look at a lot of the PLFS public labor force participation surveys, especially the recent ones, it shows a lot of uptick in terms of employment. Of course, I think the broader story is what is the skills gap?
Correct.
I think that is more of an issue, between what an employer wants. You run a firm,
Right.
What you want and what
Is available.
What is available
Right.
in the market. There's a gap.
Gap.
So I think that there's a skills deficit, which is something we need to really fix.
So government and institutions are doing enough to fill that gap?
I think my sense is it's very easy to criticize the government for a variety of things, but I think there's a genuine, my observation has been that there's been a genuine interest, genuine effort to try to bridge this gap. But I think much more needs to be done. So, for instance, countries like Singapore have these. Singapore's a small place, but still, just to give you an example, have their Institute of Technical Excellence.
Okay.
These are called ITEs.
Okay.
Which basically they provide you a diploma degree, but they ensure that you are an expert in some technical field.
Right.
In terms of, say, automobile manufacturing, or in terms of textiles, or whatever it is. So this certification basically takes them through that technical expertise. Because the skills gaps happens because for your firm, you want someone with a particular expertise.
Right.
Right? That expertise is not provided by the education institutions because they get a general degree there.
Right.
Right? A general degree is good if it enables you to get a broad picture of things.
Absolutely.
But what individuals and businesses want is specific talent. So I think that gap can be really filled by expansion of a lot of these technical institutes at a national scale. And then the corporate sector also coming part of this. I think the internships program is an interesting initiative, but the technical skill gap, there has to be a national effort across states, across parties, I think, to bridge this gap. Because eventually that is the key. There is, given the growth rate, there is prosperity happening in this country. The question really is, how do you get people to be not just part of the prosperity, which a large section of people are, entrepreneurs and all others, but also get the informal economy and others to be part of this drive. In fact, one of the reasons which I missed in my earlier segment on corporates and their sort of how they're attuned to this Dharmic way of life, the informal sector, which contributes to almost 80% of employment in the country even today, runs mainly on things like trust, society, community-based choices and things like that.
Right.
And if you really want to understand them, you need to understand this Dharmic way of life and then have policies which are aligned. So, for instance, if a local kirana shop goes bust, in all likelihood, that individual will look at his family for some financing. Within the family, people put in some money, and ensure that that person survives. The next point of shop will be some local person that they know reasonably well.
Correct.
Right? Even though if they charge higher interest rates. Right? And even if that doesn't work, then they go to a bank. Right? So imagine when I talked about making choices rationally, right? Profit and loss. If you really want to make a rational choice, you go to the bank straight away. But that's not how you work. That's not how networks work, how the informal economy works. So understanding all this again is important. And then employment in the informal sector again is, how do you scale small firms to become bigger firms?
Right.
And how do you make them employers and employees? And I think, so combination of skills gap, combination of, helping smaller firms to develop more with ease of regulations and things like that, ease of capital, I think eventually we'll come to a state where the employment issue is also dealt with.
ठीक है. रिसेंटली पीयूष गोयल का एक स्टेटमेंट बहुत वायरल हुआ था जहाँ पे जिससे बहुत सारे पर्सपेक्टिव भी निकले थे कि अगर आपको एक इकोनॉमी को डेवलप करना है तो आप सिर्फ वैसे जॉब्स क्रिएट नहीं कर सकते जो स्किल बेस्ड नहीं है बट बहुत लोगों को इन्वॉल्व करते हैं. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल अगर आपने एक डिलीवरी ऐप खोला है और उस डिलीवरी ऐप की वजह से 10,000 लोगों को जॉब मिला है बट उनका स्किल्स डेवलप नहीं हो रहा है या एनहांस नहीं हो रहा है, तो ऐसे जॉब्स या ऐसे बिजनेसेस इकोनॉमी को ज़्यादा लंबा लेकर नहीं जाते. सो हाउ डू यू सी दिस, लाइक क्रिएटिंग बिजनेसेस विच आर एक्चुअली हेल्पिंग द इकोनॉमी गो really fast or grow really fast? How do you see? Have you seen that statement of Piyush Goyal?
Yeah, I have. See, I can understand where that comes from. But I think, look, it's going to be a chaotic mix. We are not a small country. We are not a city-state like Singapore. We are not a small country, say, like other countries. We are a large, complex country with 1.4 billion people. So eventually there will be an equilibrium in a lot of all this. I think if you look at it from a logical standpoint, yes, there is a case for you to invest in more skill-based startups which add value. On the other hand, you also notice a lot of aero startups, defense startups. You see a lot of growth in these type of startups as well. So there are people who are investing time and energy in all this. But of course, okay, if you take the bigger picture and if you want the percentage of these startups to be in more skill-based, by and large, I think that's an important innovative push. But that doesn't really mean that these startups are somehow not adding value, because I think to the consumer it adds value, to you and me it adds value. If I call a Zomato or they come to your house quickly to deliver what you want. So from a market standpoint, there is a demand which is getting quick food at your house, and there's a supply and there's an app that facilitates this. So from that standpoint, it's really,
It solves my problem, though.
Yeah,
that's fine.
It solves your problem,
yeah.
right? Your problem is not always about, skill development, right? Or skill intensive sectors.
So the minister is talking about from his point of view, right?
So I think we should take it in the right spirit.
Absolutely.
I think what we should do is expand into skill intensive areas where we can become world beaters, attempt to grow some of these startups in those areas. And if you find that, within, there are other things which cater to basic needs of people, I think that's fine. I think it's just part of the, the growth that we're seeing. And this is not going to be linear, by the way, right? Much like how UPI, when it first started, till about 2019-20, I mean, informed people like us know what UPI is.
Right.
But for common people post the pandemic, it became a revolution.
Correct.
Right? So there's always a tipping point, right? We keep building. Some other events come into play, some other external factors come into play,
Right.
some other catalyst comes into play, and then it becomes a revolution. So I think we should keep pushing on all avenues, be positive about our approaches, try to diversify, take whatever some of these comments in the right spirit, and then keep pushing the bar. And I think eventually, because see, the I wouldn't say the angst, but the moat issue is this, right? We have not produced any world-leading productive capacities, from our startups and things like that, like how the US produces, like how China produces DeepSeek, for instance, right? That is where I think the sentiment is,
Correct.
right? What I'm saying is that is not a linear process, right? That could be a process much like a child. If you keep teaching a child to pedal on a tricycle, right? You might be teaching the child for about a year, 2 years. He would never do anything. He or she would never do anything. But one fine day, he will just pedal and then go for a mile, mile and a half, or 1.5 kilometers. So what I'm saying is, growth isn't necessarily linear. All that you can do is invest capital, invest resources, invest skills, invest energy, and hope that at some point a lot of these things will come together, and then there'll be a threshold, and then it'll become something substantive.
Perfect. So inequality एक बहुत बड़ा problem है, सिर्फ इंडिया का problem नहीं है, global problem है. इंडिया के context में, if I'm not wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, 1% लोगों के पास 40% wealth है. Do we have any practical way to reduce inequality?
See, inequality is a very complex subject. I think there's a lot of new work that's come up, especially with my friends Sujit Bala and Karan Basin, who have shown that inequality is reduced substantively. The World Bank themselves have come up with reports which talk that extreme poverty has almost been eliminated, which are all good signs. And the latest NSSO surveys also seems to indicate these things. And of course, there are countersides to the argument, which, the amount of reliance on, say, free food for large sections of the population. When that's sort of withdrawn, what are some of the effects? Those are, things which, we can debate and discuss. But by and large, I think over the last 10, 15 years, there's an emerging consensus that there's been extreme poverty reduction and inequality gaps are also reducing, right? But you cannot have, any society will have inequality, right? By nature, that's what competition is. One person has to lose, one person has to gain, right? So what we try to do is, if you want to, how do you manage inequality is the question.
Okay.
Eliminating inequality is a utopian feature. It's not going to happen, right? No matter what, some people might say, eliminating inequality is not going to happen. But how do you reduce inequality as much as possible, but still ensure that you manage it well? Correct. Which means people who are affected on the negative side, how do you empower them? How do you give them the resources? How do you give them education? How do you give them, like what Kautilya said, in terms of contracts, empowerment? How do you, give them basic needs? And how do you enable them to progress up the ladder?
Correct.
Right? By providing all the tools that are required, right? That's what is important to reduce inequality, in my view, because you empower them. On the other hand, how do you also expand the wealth pie? Because without the wealth creation, you're not going to have a prosperous society. Without prosperous society, there's no point just, uplifting people and reducing the gap, because you want the pie to also grow. So it's a sort of a multi-dimensional approach. And I think we, at different stages of development, we are in a lower income country. As we move up the, ladder, this will also evolve, and we have to dynamically ensure that this balance is maintained. Okay. So broadly speaking, I think there's been a lot of progress that's been made, but there's much more that we need to do as well.
So are we heading towards an employment crisis due to AI and automation? Do you sense that?
I think we are still ahead of the curve. I think how AI pans out is, in my view, still, I think we are early to assess it. In the sense that I think in some cases we're jumping the gun. So I'll give you an example, right? So AI can do a lot of these things, presentations, whatever, white collar sort of jobs that are doing, consultants. It can do most of these things now just by, putting in the right fields. But whether it really replicates what a human being can do, I think that's still question mark.
Okay.
What I think AI does is it provides a lot of support material for us to really use well, and then enhance our productivity, right? How we enhance to the next level is a human endeavor.
Okay.
And I think what AI will do is it will move us from remote tasks to more specialized tasks.
Right.
So for instance, if you're someone who's doing a degree at the moment in college, and you don't really have a passion you want to do, I would suggest you do a technical degree, which means, say, construction engineering or mechanical engineering, right? Okay, automation is there even in the automobile sector, but say sculpting, right? It's difficult for AI to sculpt as much as you can do, right? Compared to writing a code, right? So what I'm saying is the areas of expertise, areas of, significance will shift. where the premium will be on human values, anything that is human, that humans can do, and the premium will be on things on like the skill sets that you have in terms of relationships, in terms of how human you can be, and also in terms of skills that you can develop, which AI can't do, right? So one bucket is when you have conventional jobs, which is, being all the rote stuff being taken care of by AI, but then you specialize and you create a niche for yourself using this to enhance productivity. And another area is where sectors themselves are getting washed. So you go into sectors where there's specialists, where you're a specialist and you skill yourself in a way where AI cannot, replicate you. Right. But again, I think this is a shift, a churn that is happening, and it'll have its own equilibrium. And at some point, we will come to that equilibrium and come to that state. And mind you, the entire AI boom is driven by so much energy. So how sustainable it is in terms of energy levels is also another question. Of course, all the side effects of AI are also coming up. So I think it's a churn that is happening, but it's important again to go back to first principles, go back to the things that you think you're good at. If you're a good podcaster, no matter what AI comes, that is your inherent talent, right? So you have to pursue your talent, but ensure that you are skilled with the resources in the AI world so that you enhance your productivity overall.
Quick answers only.
Sure.
आपको लगता है इंडिया 20 साल में डेवलप्ड नेशन बनेगा? अगर हाँ तो क्या है उसका ट्रिक?
Stick to indigenous ideas. What suits India is most important. Be open to best practices from the rest of the world, but have an indigenous base. In my view, this Dharma-based economic frameworks is an important component of it, and use the ideas from the rest of the world which suits us, and be a confident society.
If Kautilya were alive, वो इंडियन गवर्नमेंट को क्या एडवाइस देते?
He probably would, I think, be an economic or political advisor. But the funny thing is, one of the reasons he wrote the Arthashastra, even in those times, was that I think he was, so fed up with the constraints of political economy that he said, "I'll just write a textbook so that anyone who can just pick and choose whatever they want, depending on their circumstances." So even if Kautilya was there today, I think he'll have a challenge in navigating bureaucracy.
If you were the finance minister, 3 कौन सी top priorities होगी आपको next budget में?
I would say one is on skill development, which I mentioned. That's something which is...
Even private players can contribute in this?
Yeah, of course. I think an integrated platform, something like Gati Shakti type of platform, where you have a huge skill developmental vocational training institute.
And what would be the ideal age to start that?
I would say between 18 to 25. I mean, or earlier as well. Say even 13, 14 after high school. One could get graduate to these programs.
And do you think it's easy to convince the parents in current scenario to?
I think so. If you can show them
because
results.
पढ़ना है, that is like just focus point है कि आपको exam में top करना है and you fight to get a job. Basically, that's the mindset right now.
No, if say a bunch of corporates who are willing to hire these graduates at big scale, given their skilled expertise, then I think people will see the reward. I mean, it's a long process.
Correct.
But I think that is one thing which I would suggest.
Skill development, yeah.
Another is on the role of ease of regulations, I think, which we have done a lot of work on. That is something which I would pursue. And third, how do you sort of position ourselves better in this world of so many changes, of expanding the idea of Atmanirbharta, so that not only do you engage with the rest of the world, but also ensure that we retain our strengths.
Tax पे कुछ नहीं करेंगे आप change?
No, that's fine. I mean, I think our current regime is actually fairly good, in terms of...
10-year-old को अगर आपको economics समझाना है, shortest way क्या है समझाने का?
When a 10-year-old buys a chocolate, where does the chocolate come from? Who produces the chocolate? What is the price of the chocolate? What is the price of the chocolate 6 months back and what is it now? And what are the benefits of the chocolate? And what are the health issues of the chocolate? And how do you manufacture thousands of chocolates like this? And which country is the biggest manufacturer of the chocolates? And how do they reach that place? So yeah, broadly speaking, these questions for a 10-year-old, I think might answer give you a broad picture of the economy.
उसका पापा बोले रहने दे मत ले चॉकलेट. Okay, rapid fire.
Yeah.
GDP or happiness index?
GDP, but still focusing on elements of happiness.
Okay. Growth or equality?
Growth as the primary driver, but still being aware of a more equal society.
Globalization या आत्मनिर्भरता?
Both are not
Against
opposites.
each other. Okay.
I think Atmanirbharta, but engaging with the rest of the world, which is, yeah.
A quick comment on your book JAMBA. You know, it's a fiction.
That's right. Thank you. I mean, you're one of the few people to note it. Amish, if he's listening to this, Amish was kind enough to launch the book, Amish Tripathi, almost a decade and a half back. So it's about a joint family. It was actually a self-published book, about a joint family in southern India, in Chennai, and how I saw the evolution at that time about how this joint family was changing. So I come from my mother's side, there are 14 people used to be in a particular house. From my grandmother's side, there used to be like 25 people in that particular house, all in Chennai. So I come from an extended joint family. So I really, not only is it about nostalgia, but I think it provides a lot of life lessons that one can learn and addresses a lot of the challenges that we have today as a collective unit. So that led to the book. And it's a fictional story, but yeah, once I'm done with all this, probably I need to do a sequel to that, which I'll think about. But yeah, that's
Final question. Politics को साइड में रखते हैं. आपको लगता है एग्रीकल्चर पे टैक्स होना चाहिए इंडिया में?
I think it is important to have a discussion on this at some point, because see, essentially, again, coming back to first principles, right? Within the farming community, you have rich farmers, you have really poor farmers. Of course, we don't want to tax the poor farmers, because they're really struggling already in agriculture. But there's a bunch of rich farmers who form a percentage of the population. I think there is a case to see if taxing them is an option, because they are already rich and they don't pay any taxes. But yeah, so I think it's a long process. I don't know where we'll get there, and I don't think it's one of the higher priorities now. But it's something for policymakers probably to discuss and explore.
See, आपके लिए या गवर्नमेंट के लिए या गवर्नेंस के लिए हाई प्रायोरिटी नहीं है. बाबू इस पे डिस्कस नहीं करेगा, ठीक है, इम्प्लीमेंट भी नहीं करेगा. बट एक मिडिल क्लास जब टैक्स देता है तो उसको ये लगता है कि मैं तो टैक्स दे रहा हूँ, अगर मेरा 50,000 या लाख रुपया है फिर भी मेरे को टैक्स देना पड़ता है मंथली इनकम पे. बट देयर इज़ अ फार्मर जो बड़ी बड़ी गाड़ी में घूम रहा है और वो टैक्स नहीं देता है, वो फार्मर होने के नाते टैक्स बचा लेता है. सो दे कीप ऑन डिस्कसिंग बट दे डोंट हैव अ वॉइस, बिकॉज मिडिल क्लास का वॉइस टेक्निकली भारत में नहीं है, या तो एकदम लोअर क्लास का है या एकदम अपर क्लास का है. सो उसका सोल्यूशन आपको लगता है मिलेगा इंडिया में?
No, I think it'll change, because see, in a more urbanized society where we become more and more urban. So why is it, for instance, having a metro now has become such a big sort of political thing? I mean, we saw a recent inauguration in Bengaluru of the Yellow Line, where I think even the politicians are more and more seeing that a lot of people are coming to urban areas. The middle class is really expanding.
Right.
And once the middle class expands to an extent where it becomes politically relevant, then automatically middle class needs will be taken care of. Right? I think we are reaching that stage.
Right.
We would reach that stage in our evolution in the next 5-10 years. More is the sense I'm getting. So yeah, so I get what you're saying, but I think eventually things will their voices would be heard.
Perfect. थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर योर टाइम. प्लीज़ गाइज, आप डिस्क्रिप्शन में जाएंगे तो आपको कौटिल्यानॉमिक्स और धर्मोनॉमिक्स का लिंक मिलेगा. ये बुक आप लीजिए, पढ़िए, अपने फ्रेंड से इसे शेयर करिए, और ये पॉडकास्ट में आपको क्या अच्छा लगा वो भी कमेंट करके ज़रूर बताना. थैंक यू फॉर वॉचिंग. सब्सक्राइब करना हमारा चैनल. श्रीराम, थैंक यू वेरी मच.
Thank you. Namaste.
जय श्री राम.
Sure.